Evening all on Play Chess and streaming to YouTube. Okay, I thought this week we'd interrupt looking at Bobby Fischer, but kind of related to Bobby Fischer in the 1972 World Championship match is where that match was played in Reykjavik. Iceland's chess took off after 1972, and this yearly Swiss tournament became one of the strongest open Swiss tournaments in the world. And our grandmaster from the Netherlands, though slightly French-sounding name, Erwin l'Ami, the friend, did exceptionally well, supported by his wife, who also did very well in the tournament. So both really, really strong players. So Erwin l'Ami, a 2605 Dutch grandmaster, playing in this tournament. Let's have a look at some of his games, because I think it's just such a fantastic rating performance. It's absolutely outstanding. So let's see what we can gather from it. So in the first round game, Erwin was playing Kjetil Strand, a 2037, so a bit of a warm-up game, much lower rated FIDE rated opponent. D4 was played. I hope stream's okay and the board's okay. Let's just make sure everything's okay before setting off. So this might be quite a long one if we do get to have a look at more than, say, 4 games. Otherwise I'll split it into 2 parts. So is the board okay? Before we continue, I think I'm just checking on my preview. It seems okay. Large enough, no problems. Okay, so Erwin l'Ami. So he plays D4. And his opponent, played D5, solid, C4, C6, solid. So black, with this Slav defense, very, very popular, hopes to play very solidly and respectfully. Knight C3. Now we have, in this position, I'll just connect a live book. The most popular is actually Knight F6, but E6 and D takes C4 are also very popular. D takes C4 was played. We'll add a bit to here as well through this. So E3, just to try and collect the pawn with minimal hassle. So even though it's closing in the bishop for a moment, not a problem. B5. Okay, so white usually plays A4. That's the main move here. There's nothing much else. A4. B4. Now white usually plays Knight E4. And here, there's a top move that's most often played in this position with black, and it looks a little bit maybe curious if you don't know it. Queen D5. This is the top move that's usually played to try and equalise the position, and games often continue like this, with black seemingly clinging on to that pawn. This kind of continuation, there's been 9 games, for example, from here, and it's meant to be about equal. So that's very interesting, this Queen D5 move, how it's very, very popular. Now in the game, the opponent actually played much rarer. This is unbelievably rare, this move here that we see. You might think it looks like, logical, formatic, but actually it's very, very rare to play E6. I think white here has potentially a big opening advantage evolving from this position. Okay, what does he want to do? Well, he takes on C4. So black for the moment. Okay, there's bishop A6. You could say the bishop's not hemmed in. The king side, though, needs development. And the knight is actually doing something very interesting here, that the natural knight F6 will result in the black queen potentially being on F6, which can be an important tempo gain. That's why I'm not sure this position is that theoretical, because black, if he has his queen on F6, it's going to run into tempo gains, opening up the bishop here. And we see that in action now, that black does play Knight F6. And white's immediately now, it's no exaggeration, I think white's got a clear advantage here at move 8. But remember, his opponent's only 2037. But this is not how to play the opening. This particular position, because watch what happens. Knight takes, queen takes, The queen is a big tempo gainer. Knight f3 for the moment. Okay, knight d7, white castles. Black should have perhaps got on with things with bishop e7 and try and cope with that position, but again delayed kingside development and played bishop b7. And here we have this e4, so immediately e5 is actually quite dangerous. For a start, bishop d6 runs into e5, but the queen gets out of the way, because also I think the queen is a bit concerned if she has to go to g6. For example, here, well, there's bishop g5, that's embarrassing, and then we're taking on e7 and black's lost casting rights. So already there are some problems in this position. So the queen retreats, and this is not a good sign. And now a5 is played, which gives this nice option of a6, rook c8, and with black not developing on the king side, it's a really dangerous position now after knight g5. This structure and things like queen f3, queen h5 are really quite menacing already. The structure is under scrutiny here. Black plays bishop d6. Now even the natural bishop e7 I think will suffer from a knockout blow immediately in this position. Bishop d6 was played, but if bishop e7, can you see something quite crushing here? If I give you 20 seconds to have a look at this position, what do you think white could play in this position? White's play, this is just a variation that could have occurred in the game. So black in the game had played bishop d6, but say bishop e7 for sake of argument was played, what do you think white could play here? Any ideas? Shows black has neglected his kingside development. This is too late now to try and castle if white plays incisively. Okay, not what you guys have mentioned so far. Not bishop takes e6. I think black can survive with bishop takes g5 there. No, actually, knight takes f7 brings the king out to play. And here, bishop takes e6, for example, is really dangerous. Check, we've got a major king chase in this position. For example, here is a mate in 4. Check, check. And mate, forcing mate. It shows the brutality of the position. That knight takes f7 is really quite dangerous to parry. This comes up because I was a bit originally confused when I played over this game a couple of times, and I was wondering why did the game continuation happen. Well, it seems that this is really dangerous, and if black had refused the bishop, by the way, this position is also pretty dangerous. Say this, queen f3 threatening queen f7, pretty crude. And again, it's really, really troublesome for black, this kind of stuff, where black is really suffering a great deal here. So this knight takes f7, this tower-like sacrifice, has got great promise to it. White's going to end up with a massive position if black's not careful. These variations show that knight takes f7 can't really be tolerated. But black, perhaps sensing some danger, played bishop d6 in the game. And again, here, okay, knight takes f7 might actually be dangerous in this position, but first e5 was played, and black didn't want to move the bishop back again or to c7. He actually tried to give up a piece to try and complicate things. Bishop takes, so he's giving up a piece for just 2 pawns. So really, white's just a piece up here and could perhaps just play queen e2 and be a piece up. The game's effectively over already, to be honest. But instead of playing queen e2, a much more accurate move perhaps is played, queen h5, allowing a temporary bishop sacrifice after the queen's kick to h6. This bishop sacrifice, so giving a piece back, seems quite sporting. But the thing is, now queen g7, and we've got this double attack on f7 and h8. Rook f8, knight takes. White's going to be winning the exchange if nothing else. Queen e7. It's over really because White's getting material now. Lots of material. Bishop h6. And we see winning one exchange now after f6. After taking here. Winning one exchange. The exchange up. And Black didn't want to take there to be two exchanges down. It's over. Played knight e5. Rook fd1, and all it needs now is White to play this. So if he can just kick this knight away, he's going to get rook d7 in. So Black's lost here really. He plays g5, h4, c5, and now Black just gets dismantled. H takes g, f takes g, and here well, all sorts of things win in this position. Bishop g7 was played, and it's just a crushing position. Black resigned here. For example, I mean, what does Black do? If the knight moves, it's a disaster. Immediately rook d7 and taking here. And if the knight doesn't move, well, it's just horribly material down. If rook takes, we can just take this. We're two exchanges up. It's just lost. So it was a bit of a disaster game. If we just review the opening, so basically if you're going to play this with Black, it's important to remember queen d5 here. In live book, this is the most used move, queen d5. So it shows that if you have this e6, it seems kind of natural, but it's just wrong apparently. I mean, this is a really good position for White after knight f6 especially. Black maybe should have tried knight d7 first and then a bit safer for knight f6. But even so, this is quite a nice position for White here. So anyway, so that was a warm-up game against the 2037. So let's go on to round 2 now. Or let's just flick through the moves again just quickly here. So knight f6. We saw this knight g5, really dangerous knight g5. Also, okay, if knight f6 had been played, by the way, again, it's just really dangerous, this sort of stuff. Queen h5, threatening knight e6 as well as the f7 pawn. This position is good for White, with Black struggling. White's got a nice space advantage here, but yeah, it's better than the game. Okay, so let's go on to round 2. So in round 2, okay, he was playing Black against the 2307, so at least the FIDE master strength opponent. So Benjamin Hal Dawson, 2307, played e4, and Erwin Lamy played the French defense e6. And we have d4, d5, knight c3 as though we're going to a winner. But White plays this interesting variation, knight ge2, which is actually the third most popular move in live book. Temporary pawn sacrifice. So, very interesting line, unusual fourth move, knight ge2. We have d takes e4, a3, Black takes, knight takes. And yeah, here I think a very nice move was played in the circumstance. If Black tries to attack the centre with c5, I think this goes into White's hands actually. White probably wants c5 in this line. For example, check and then d5 justifies White's position. This could actually be kind of dangerous, this kind of thing for Black. It looks like a reverse Albin counter gambit. So actually c5 looks a little bit unsafe. This move is actually the top engine move and also the top move in live book. About 400 games nearly. Knight c6, just putting immediate pressure on d4. So we have bishop b5, pinning the knight. Knight ge7, avoiding double pawns. Bishop e3. Now black castles. So he wants to give the pawn back, but you'll notice white's lost a bit of central control actually. Queen d2. Now a6, encouraging white to lose that light square bishop. If the bishop went back to a4, the bishop actually gave itself up here, but bishop a4, this might actually be quite good for black. After knight a5, for example, takes knight c4. This looks actually quite interesting for black, this sort of position. Here, this looks as though black's got good light square control and pressure. So actually, you know, white gave up the light square bishop, but of course you might think, well, isn't white going to suffer now on the light squares? In theory, but this bishop's blocked in for the moment on c8. So what to do with that? Well, after knight takes e4, we see also that knight c5 might be useful for white. Black plays b6 just to put the bishop on this diagonal and stop knight c5. We see casting queenside. Bishop b7, f3, queen e7, king b1. Rook ad8, sensible. Black hasn't got any bad pieces as such here. It seems a pleasant enough position. Maybe black's more than just equalised. He might even be a little bit better. There's even technically a tactic threatened here. Knight takes and then e5 is on the cards. White gets out of the way of that with queen c3. So the queen is not the first thing protecting the pawn. So now black, though, has a natural plan just to put more pressure on d4 here with rook d7. So as though he's just going to double rooks. Very neat configuration of pieces. h4. Looks as though some sort of hack attack is planned. So here, actually, f6 was played, depriving white of the g5 square. h5. And it looks as though h6 might be useful for white. That's stopped in its tracks with h6. There's not too much concern about the light squares here. Black has the light square bishop, so in theory can get away with a bit more on the light squares, given that white hasn't got a light square bishop to make use of light square weaknesses. So you can play a move like h6 without too much fear. Rook h e1, rook f d8, putting more pressure on d4. So black's position looks quite beautiful here. The pressure on d4. Not only that, black can be pedantic here. What is the rook going here for away from the pawn? That pawn could be subject of attack. And let's see this. Knight f2. Immediately, actually here, after knight f2, this might be a slight slip up already in this position. Maybe this was better to put some pressure on e6 to tie the queen down. But with this knight f2, black now plays queen f7, asking some simple questions like, what are you doing about this pawn? The problem is, it's twofold. If white tries to protect the pawn now with g4, then in fact e5 is quite fun here for black. For example, d takes, rook takes, rook takes, rook takes, knight takes, knight takes e5, and this structure looks like a big target all of a sudden. What does white do here? He's actually losing material. For example, like this, takes, 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 pawn up, thanks very much. Pawns are weak on the light squares. So queen f7 isn't that easy to parry in this position. It seems black is getting the upper hand now after queen f7 in this game. And white just sacrifices the pawn to clamp down on black's e5. He just gives up the h-pawn. Queen takes h5, pawn up, thanks very much. And also this knight is now ready to torture white with these squares in particular. We see black having some good strategic light squares in this position. coming up. So g4, temporarily covering f5. Queen a5. Black wants the exchange of queens. He's a pawn up. I know it's opposite colour bishops, but it doesn't matter. Queen d5. White refuses again. But in doing so, the queen now installs herself to f3. Threatening immediately, knight takes d4 now, because there's a pin here against the loose queen. The queen protects herself against knight takes d4. But now we see this beautiful idea. Well, immediately the engine's crying out for using the d5 square by playing b5, just to loosen white's control of d5 here, because this is a bad bishop. So if c takes, we can, this is a nice position to pivot around like this to d5. But for the moment, actually, also knight e7, the same idea, but with either h5 or b5 to weaken f5 or d5 respectively, will be lovely for this knight to come to f5 or d5. You notice this bad bishop here, and this is what happens now. There's a beautiful choice of either b5 or h5 after rook c1. So you can take your pick to get the knight to a wonderful square now. White is severely weak on these light squares, and look at this lovely light square bishop. But yeah, generally the f5 or d5 squares are really vulnerable. We see black playing b5, trying to get that d5 square now. And yeah, white's structure is actually being compromised here in the process of losing one of these key strategic squares. So we see king a1, b takes, so he's lost the d5 square here. Actually, I saw this quotation earlier today: masters try and win squares. I think lesser players trying to win material, but he's won that d5 square quite significantly. He occupies it now, bishop d5. Even wanting to give up this pawn doesn't really matter. There's so much great compensation. So white takes that pawn, but now the knight also wants the f5 square. So we have h5. So another pawn is lost for the moment. But look at the position. So white, 2, 3, 4, 5. White is a pawn up, but look at this position with this occupation of both those strategic light squares. And of course, immediately, knight takes e3 is threatened. So the queen comes back to defend that. But what a beautiful position for black. Once he gets his pawn back, he dominates the position, and white's pawn structure is a wreck. This is a much more compact pawn structure here. So black, even though a pawn down, doesn't mind the exchange of queens here. Look at how fragmented white's pawns are. So queen takes e2, takes, and now the king f7, just with ideas like rook h8 to get the pawn back with dominating pieces on light squares. And the knight tries to do something, knight d3, rook h8, trying to get the pawn back. And look, the bishop's controlling h1 as well here. And the rook's tied down to e3. So black's getting the pawn back with advantage soon. Just has to move the rook. Knight d3. Okay, this pawn's attacked now. Protect that. He's getting the pawn back. Knight b4. Okay, one more delay on this. He could actually just take here to get his pawn back. He plays bishop f3, keeping the light square bishop. Rook f2, bishop e4. Okay, he's not in a rush totally to get this pawn back, but he's going to soon. Now he does. And you see black has got a beautiful position compared to white structurally. The fragmented pawns, look at the structure here. These light squares are great to occupy, and this is a bad bishop really, blocked in by both pawns on dark squares. So in this desperate position, black also has some concrete threats here. Maybe just to take and then play f5 and then try and win f4 soon. White desperately tried to get some piece activity in this position and cleared the way for his dark square bishop for a moment, but giving up a pawn, but also trying to get a rook to the 7th. So it seems like a good idea actually. It seems to try and cause some problems. So it was taken with c takes. If bishop takes, then yeah, this is okay, but yeah, c takes was played, which may be a little bit stronger. We have this check, king g6. So black now a pawn up One danger aspect, though, is that this is an outside running past pawn, and the king's just blocked this pawn. Bishop c5, rook d8, knight c6, rook a8, rook e1, as though, yeah, the king wants to be kicked around a bit, if possible. Rook h4. White's pawns are under great scrutiny now. Check. King h5. Bishop a7. So this pawn is falling. But now white tries to use these two pawns over here. b4. Is it quick enough? Is this quick enough, this sort of construction? d4, b5. Bishop takes c6. B takes. d3. Yeah, this pawn's going to be distracting white. Rook d7. Rook c4. c7. And okay, c7 is winning the exchange potentially here, because bishop b8 is annoying. Well, black decides to play rook takes a7 to get rid of this dangerous pawn. So an exchange sacrifice. Check. Taking. But it's an exchange, not really a sacrifice, because there's 4 pawns for the exchange, and this is overwhelming. And it's even black's move here. He actually plays g5. Okay, so king b3, g4. These pawns are just overwhelming material for the 2 rooks. Rook takes d3, e5. The rooks are just no match for the pawns here. Knight d4. Check. And here, white resigned. It's inevitable these pawns were just going queen, herded by the rook and knight. So it seems that white played a tricky variation against the French, but black played an exceptionally powerful variation with knight c6, and this idea really worked out well. This light square control really worked out well for black. And just, in fact, one of my pet ideas recently, black is actually adopting, you call this an overprotection strategy. He's coordinating everything in the center very, very nicely. So black's position here is very, very beautiful. If you look at this is like overprotection of a central square, and the position looks after itself here for black. There's not too many concerns. It really does look after itself, and black's in a great position now after this to play e5. So white's on a downhill after this, after losing that pawn, and then loses his light square control. So I think Nimzovich will be quite proud of this game, because these pawns are just committed here. If this one moves, then we lose d5. If this one moves, then we lose f5, and we see both of those squares captured by Erwin. So a positional, sequence here to get both d5 and f5. Even though a pawn down, he's collecting that pawn virtually by force after a few delays. And once he does that, you see that black is so much better qualitatively. The only thing white tries is with these pawns, but they're not dangerous enough. Black just does an exchange sack to stop all this, and he's got loads of pawns. So a great win there with the black pieces against Benjamin Haldorsen. Okay, so let's look at another game. So this is in round 3. Now the opposition starts stepping up in this Swiss tournament. In round 3, Yui Yang, a 2-4-3-3. Erwin is playing white. So we have d4, d5, another Slav, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, d takes, a4. And black plays very, very sensibly in this game. This line is a real pain to try and get any advantage at all with the white pieces. Black's bishop is nicely outside of the pawn chain. Knight b4, castles, e6. This looks, in fact, this is all theoretical. Usually white plays knight e5, so games often run like this. It's theoretical anyway. So there's 63 games after queen e2, 34 after knight c2, and it carries on like this a lot of the time apparently. But anyway, instead of knight e5, we have here in the game the move bishop d2, black castled, rook fd1, h6, and there's not much to get an advantage compared to the games we've just seen. Black's position is quite solid here. White plays knight a2, okay, a5, and black controls that b4 square, bishop c3, queen b6. So black is really solid. In fact, evaluation is almost zero here. No one's really got anything going in this position. It's just the sort of thing you'd play for with black, I assume, to get a respectable draw. So it's not, you know, like an ambitious opening like the king's in your defense. Black is just trying to be solid. His bishops are quite good. Rook fd8, rook a1, bishop b4, rook ac1, bishop e4, bishop d3, some exchanges, and it's a bit dull. All the bishops could come off the board. Some more exchanges are encouraged from black, and white is left after rook b1 potentially with not much of an advantage here if black just played queen c7. But funny enough, black maybe slightly slipped up slightly with knight takes e5. Even though the queens are coming off here, it seems white in this position has got now something to work with. If we look at this position here, clearly this is a backward pawn which can be built up on. And also this pawn might be slightly vulnerable in the future. If black ever plays c5, then we have the b5 square to hit this pawn with. So does white have enough to try and play for a win in this position after rook d1? Let's do a quick poll here. Do you think white has enough to win here? So do you think white has enough to win here? If I give you 20 seconds, what do you think about this position? So yeah, black's played a super solid opening and gone into an endgame basically. But is it a comfortable endgame? What do you guys think? Okay, there's some pressure here. We have rook c8, rook db1, and okay, white's on that pawn, so rook cc7. The rooks are slightly more passive than white's rooks. We have g4 now being played, so gaining a bit of space on the king side. King f8, king g2. So you can torture black for a bit here. f4. And yeah, black now commits after this with the move c5. Commits with c5. It looks a bit strange. Why give up this b5 square? Why have lateral pressure on the pawn? What is white threatening? White might be threatening to bring the king in a little bit more and maybe start squeezing potentially with something like this. Potentially. Let's just say that black didn't play c5. Black did play c5, but let's have a look at that. Let's have a look. I just want to quickly have a look at variation here. Maybe c4 with the idea of c5. It could get more uncomfortable for black. Black seems to be quite passive, but whatever the reason, it seems, yeah, black felt time to go for it to try and activate these rooks. He plays c5, which looks a little bit tempting, but he's giving up the b5 square, so slight downside there. And immediately Erwin goes into that b5 square with rook 6 to b5. we have c takes, c takes. So black gets a little bit of play with rook c2 check. But is this enough? Rook c3? Okay, one pair of rooks needs to be used though, and exchange another exchange, because how to handle this e3? If king f3 here, then rook takes d4 might be okay, just about for black, although it's still kind of difficult. But white goes for further simplification here with rook 1 b3, so he doesn't mind even more simplification. He's still got this rook b5 now on the cards. So we see rook c7, but for the moment plays f5 and encouraging fracture of black's pawn structure a bit more. He wants to leave an isolated pawn on e6. Now black takes here. Now you might think that's a bit strange because it's giving white more central pawns, right? But if black had played something like king e7, yeah, it's still uncomfortable here for black. Maybe white's just gaining a bit of more space and there's room for a bit more torture. But black kind of commits here with e takes. So it seems we've got central pawns here coming at black's king potentially as well. And Erwin's increasing his advantage. In fact, yeah, you could say this is a big advantage. It looks like a big advantage. Maybe the best was to actually play king e7. Let's just run this through for a moment. Let's say king f6, rook b5, and then we're losing this pawn. If rook c3, king f3, e takes, it doesn't seem that promising. Black's ending up losing the a pawn. So yeah, it seems the root of the problem started with c5 and black's just sliding down here. So e takes f5, g takes, so we've got more central pawns now. A counter-attack on a4. Rook takes b7 though, so we've got a rook on the 7th and we've got these central pawns just ready to come up the board. Rook takes a4, king f4, and the king is also kind of aggressive here. We can set up some mating threats. Rook a3, e4, a4. The king comes in, so just one more step and we've got mating threats. Rook b3, rook a7, a3, king d6, threatening mating 2. Check, king c5, rook b3. Now e5, and this is really dangerous. White, by playing e5, has got things like e6 or just getting this pawn up here, and then these two pawns will again provide a mating net for the black king. We have rook b2. It's a lost position now. Rook takes a3 and black resigned in this position. He was totally outplayed. This is just a horrendous position. If he didn't, I mean, if he doesn't play rook b2, what is black doing actually here? If check, then king d6. This is horrible. We're just gonna, just do anything. d5 or rook takes a3. It's just an overwhelmingly bad position by this stage. So rook b2. So black was just totally outplayed. But it seems that, if black had not played c5, maybe it would have been a much longer game. Let's have a quick look at that again. So black had a very solid position for quite a while. This is fairly equal at the moment. I'll tell you where the evaluation shift really happened. I think it was around here, where no, even here, knight takes e5, almost like sensible. I think really that c5 move probably didn't help, but black had to sit passively in this position and probably just made things worse. So yeah, c5 I would say was the main problem with, in my opinion, with black's game here in retrospect. But yeah, black was positionally outplayed. I don't know what you guys think of this game. It's a kind of positional grind, but the pawns are just so evidently strong with the king. I mean, in terms of king quality, this king's far more aggressive than the black king, and it's a classic rook on the 7th, restricting the opponent's king. So this is a classic recipe. You bring up your own king, you bring up your pawns, the rook on the 7th restricts the opponent's king. It's like classic, positional play in the end game. Capablanca would like this, you'd imagine. Okay, so that was a positional slaughter eventually. Okay, so there was a draw in round 4, so let's go on to round 5. Now things start getting really tough. The stakes go higher in round 5. Erwin is playing Sabino Brunello in round 5, who's 2-5-4-0, probably a grandmaster, Brunello, I expect. So yes, d4. So Sabino Brunello plays d5, and we get another. Guess what? We get another Slav. This is all the rage. The Slav defense is all the rage nowadays. So knight f3. Sabino Brunello playing knight f6. Knight c3, and a sort of repeat of the previous game with the bishop coming to f5. Bishop takes c4. Black playing bishop b4. Yes, it's pretty solid. And in fact, this game, again, white doesn't seem to have much initially from the opening. Bishop d3. In fact, there's an annoying pin now. Bishop h5. White gives up the d5 square with this committal move, giving up the d5 square. And black seems to have essentially a French defense with the bishop outside of the pawn chain. This is a nice, solid looking French defense pawn structure with the bishop outside of the pawn chain. So not too many worries, you'd think, for black. We have some exchanges here, and white, it doesn't seem that inspiring to play on move 17 this move, queen d2, offering the exchange of queens. But I guess white would have something to play for, but the engine reckons that's totally equal this position. It'd be like 0-0-0, it reckons. But anyway, black kept some excitement with queen e7, and we have now knight e1, and now knight c2. So the knight can reroute here. This might be useful for something. You'd imagine if you're really aggressive, you might try this. Bishop g6 though. Light square bishops come off. Fascinatingly though, black took with the f pawn. Funny enough. Maybe take with the h pawn. You think in principle you take towards the center in principle. But he took with the f pawn. Maybe he had his reasons. Slightly more fragmentary, the pawn structure. If you look at it, just bird's eye view, the pawn structure is another island over here. But is that enough to try and win the game? Okay, so what do you think here? Does white have enough to win here? I might pose that question. So we'll give you 20 seconds here. Does white have enough to try and win this position? What do you reckon? It looks pretty simplified with all the bishops off, pair of knights off. White's got this space advantage, black's got more pawn islands, but the f file, is that going to be dangerous for black? To be honest, the engine view is that white has a small advantage here. Less than half a pawn, actually, though. So let's see. Rook fc1. Rook c7. Knight a3. Black takes here. Now, knight b8. Now, already something slipped up here, actually, you'll notice. Because, what about this? How did this happen? That there's knight b5 to d6. Hold on a second. Why has this happened? Well, let's see. Why did black just do what we just saw? After knight a3, the rook was attacked, right? If rook ec8, then taking knight b5 is unfortunately forking a7 and the rook. And actually here, Actually, I don't think this is, this is might be even better to play something else here. A5 and just play for knight d6. Again, the knight seems to be coming to d6 anyway. In that variation, it seems that white is getting a small advantage in getting his knight over here. If black had played a6, then we just land the rook on c7, right? And we just dominate the c file, so white's getting a big advantage there. So there's a concession here that white's getting a knight to d6, which looks to me quite attractive. So knight d6, rook f8, g3, giving the king some air, and also covering that f4 square if needed in the future. Queen c7. Okay, queen c7. We see now rook c5. Now there isn't any naughty tactic, by the way. Knight takes e5 for this. We can actually just take here because of check. This is still going to be good for white. It's just munching pawns here. So there's no naughty tactic allowed here. Rook c5 looks like a solid positional move. a5, king g2. And yeah, white has this grip here on this position. Queen b6, queen c3. Threatening now, knight takes b7 to play rook takes g5. Now, although knight takes b7 is on here, white didn't use that. Maybe he felt in some way it was giving black some counterplay. For example, let's have a quick look. Knight takes d4. This position might be tricky to try and win from. There's a bit of maybe counterplay here. f3 square is a bit vulnerable. But anyway, so he didn't go for that. He actually played h3, stopping black mark out this f3 square, h6. And again, knight takes b7 looks interesting, but in fact, white keeps more tension in the game with knight b5, king h8, queen e3, so he's got a good grip on the dark squares. Rook c3, it seems to be just holding the position with a nice knight on b5. And black's just waiting around, wondering, okay, what's going on here? What are you going to do? Queen e2. Now, okay, there's a little trap. If knight takes d4, we just play queen e3. We've got a nice pin on the queen. Yeah, so that's not on the cards. King g8, just waiting around. And now here comes one idea now. Rook f3. Try and get this f file going. Okay, black takes on f3. Queen takes f3. And now, actually, this e6 pawn is starting to come to light as a target. You know, queen g4 looks at e6. We have knight b4, queen g4. And immediately knight d6 is threatened with queen takes e6 just to interrupt the protection of e6. So yeah, maybe this fg, we start to see, you know, it seems to be an unprincipled move, but specifically e6 might, you know, be more vulnerable than if h takes g6 had been played earlier. Queen c6, knight d6, so he's on e6 now. Queen d7. And now we have h4, undoubling black's pawns. Why would you want to undouble the pawns here? Well, there might be more exploitable weaknesses now after undoubling the pawns. In fact, so h5 marks out and fixes these two pawns soon, if needed. He does that immediately, in fact. So yeah, black's, you know, white's got a few positional advantages here. He's got a good grip on g6. This pawn is locking down these two. He's got a nice b5 square, nice knight on d6. The queen's got queen g6 as well, technically. That might be useful at some point. But at the moment it's safeguarding d4. Knight e7. f4. Knight c8. And yeah, this might be a slight slip up, knight c8. Maybe better to move the king, another waiting move. It seems after this move knight c8, white grabs a big positional advantage here, believe it or not. Can you see what white plays in this position? White play, and apparently, well, gets a significant advantage. What would you play here with white in this position? Has black lost patience at move 42? We have this knight c8. What does white play? Any ideas? What would you play here? Okay. Well, okay, it seems actually the only way to play for an advantage. F5. F5 is played. So here, if E takes, we've got knight takes F5, and we're now threatening knight takes, winning the queen. And this is unpleasant for black, to say the least. For example, like this, check, E6, and this is starting to be really nasty for black. It's actually a forced win, this position. Mate in 10, apparently. This position is like a forced win. So yeah, this is really dangerous, this F5. And black does the best move not to take. He plays knight takes D6. And we have F takes. And now here, on queen takes A4 was played. If queen E7, E takes, this is better for white here after queen F5. It's a bit passive for black. In fact, D5 might drop, for example, it's passive. So black actually went for queen takes A4. Okay, is he going to get perpetual checks or something? Because otherwise these two pawns look absolutely winning. Perhaps, you know, technically best was something like queen C6, queen C7 or queen E7. That's what the engine would choose. But maybe, you know, black is trying for perpetual check or something. But is he going to get it here? Now, at move 50, I think they go on to 30-second increments per move. So this could be a very long game. Check, queen C1, E7. So black has got to keep up the checks. And I find this quite amusing now from move 47. Can he keep up the checks? Check, 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 check. Now he plays A4 check. Yeah, white plays the very best move in this position, which is king A3. If he did play king B4, then it's equal. It's just perpetual check time like this. Yeah. So he plays king A3 here. Important to play accurately. Check. Gives up B2 for the king to go to C5. Check. 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 King going to E5. Check. Check. The checks are starting to run out after king E6. Black resigned here at move 60. He resigned here. Let's have a look. If queen C6 to try and stop E8, D5, queen B5 to stop E8 still. Queen F3 is a forced mate in 7 apparently. And there's no checks here as well. So now white is threatening a forced mating sequence. E.g. here's a forced mate in 6. Check. And then we're queening the pawn. Okay. So yeah, it was a fun one. So it seems yet another game where this one he definitely had a small advantage again and made the most out of it. He's making the most out of all his chances. But what is fascinating is maybe some of us in this position would be very, very tempted to play knight takes b7. But isn't that fascinating that white from this position decides to use the F file and come down, you know, with F4, F5 later. What a fascinating change of plan to try and just use the F file. And it seemed to work like a treat, because this F4, F5 and undoubling the pawns is just an exceptionally dangerous plan. Here, very, very dangerous for black, this position. If black had tried to give more resistance, let's have a quick look at this. This position is really dangerous. Queen A6, this is just, again, it seems though white's got potentially a winning position with check and E7 coming up. So again, black might be forced to try for perpetual. And maybe this was the way to play it with great accuracy. Maybe there was a perpetual now on the cards, but yeah, maybe black did slip up. I mean, investigation will show on this game if black slipped up here. Maybe it was around here with queen takes A4. So knight takes D6. So we're saying queen C6. This position here, yeah, queen A6 is a difficult move to try and find, but maybe it's like the only move which gives black some drawing chances just in time. Otherwise, this pawn is queening. So maybe that was the resource which this position might have saved black. Never know, you never know. But anyway, so yeah, he another, you know, these people play the Slav defense against him, and they get a good position, but he's outplaying them later. So another positional win. But yeah, the knight coming to D6 is great stuff. Okay, so let's have a look at another game. Now, in round 6, he was playing black against Jacek Stopper 2544, and actually, maybe showing he's from the Netherlands, Dutch defense was played F5, and white played knight C3, knight F6, bishop G5, and here in live book, yeah, D5 is quite popular in this particular position because white hasn't played C4. So if black does get this dent in the structure, he's got the bishop pair, which is some compensation. It's a playable position apparently. Lots of games from this position, particular position. So white takes on F6, E3. So we have Queen F3. This is quite popular here. Queen F3. Putting immediate pressure on D5. Queen D7. Now we have Bishop B5. Knight C6. And now this looks like a really powerful move. Knight F4. It's actually stopped with G5. Knight C1. And again, it looks as though white's positioning, you know, doing quite nicely here with the knights. Black castle's queenside. Now this structure, we'd like to undermine the structure because we've got this dark square bishop. So F4 was played to try and loosen white on the dark squares. H3. F takes. Bishop E7. White castle's queenside. A6. King goes to B8. And actually, after Rook D2, H5, it seems as though black has a reasonable position here. We have King B1, F5. So he's gaining space on this side. Queen F2, Queen D6. Now we see the move H4, trying to get this F4 square, but the compensation of the G file has to be factored in. G takes, Queen F4, black takes, moves the bishop back, and the structure is a bit wrecked over here. Bishop takes, knight D3, and it really looks nice to play knight E5 here. Looks as though, why has Erwin done this? the two knights against the two bishops? Well, he's got that g-file pressure. Rook f2, rook g3, and he's got pressure now on e3. So it's not all roses for white. Rook h3 here. Knight f4. Now black takes on h3 and installs the rook again to hit e3. So actually the knights are not ideal. They're not strangulating the bishops just yet. In fact, after knight d1, I mean, who do you think's better here? If I gave you that question, do you prefer, you know, white or black here? It seems actually after that knight d1, it seems as though white's knights aren't the most aggressive looking knights ever on the chessboard. I don't want to put faults in your mind that black's better, but I think black is slightly better myself. So bishop g6 is played. And here, yeah, you might think, hold on a sec, bishop g6. Why isn't there knight f4? Knight f4, that might be a move actually. It might be a reasonable move to play knight f4, but it was delayed. King c1. But here now we see c5, so black is undoubling his pawns, trying to weaken white. And if that is ignored here, let's imagine this is ignored. D takes was played. If king d2, then this could be good. This position, rook g4, hitting d4. And then f4, and we've liberated this bishop. And also we've got things like this. So, you know, knight takes, we've got bishop g5. Ouch. So it's quite tricky actually, c5. So white plays d takes c5. We have bishop takes c5. So clearly this bishop is actually breathing now a bit. It's not blocked in. It's this bishop looks a bit silly though. King d2, c6. Knight f4 blocking this bishop. Bishop d6. Knight h3. King c7. Okay, it's king e2. And now black actually gives up this pawn temporarily. f4. So he's hitting c2. In fact, this last move might be a little bit dodgy, king e2, but white might be slightly worse already anyway, even if he didn't play king e2. It's like seemingly allowing this c pawn to be attacked. So f4 hitting the c2 pawn. Knight takes, bishop takes c2. And if this knight falls, then we're going to take here. So knight takes, which was only a double pawn, by the way. So bishop takes on e3. So it seems black has these central pawns to push. Knight f4, rook e4. And beautiful centralizing move with the bishop. Bishop e5, looking in both directions. Looking after things. b3. King d6. King c2. Bishop g3 here now. Forcing matters, going into rook and pawn ending. Knight takes g3, h takes. Can black win this rook and pawn ending? Let's see, king e5. He's a pawn up, clearly. King f4, he's going after this pawn. He wants to go after this pawn. Check. Rook e1. Rook b1. Rook b2, he's getting to that pawn soon. Check. Rook c3, but this pawn's going to have to drop. Takes. So he's got this dangerous passed pawn now. Check. Rook b2. Takes g2. Check. King d4. Rook takes b3. This is actually winning now for black. Check. King takes d5. Here, black is winning here. He plays rook b4, threatening to queen, and he's also got rook g4 to cover things. So here actually white resigned here. If check, then we have rook g4. This position, yeah, we're just queening. So yeah, he's had a winning rook and pawn ending there for a while actually. If we just go back, so this move forced a winning rook and pawn ending, bishop g3. It's very difficult. Have a look at that again. I think yeah, white's technically just losing here. It's just a very difficult position. Okay, so he won that. Yeah, that seems to be an interesting game in the Dutch defence. Okay, let's look at another one. So I'm just now this is a remarkable game in round 7. He's playing against like the top seed of the tournament, Shakria Mamedarov, a 2-7-5-6. So the top seed of the tournament. And I just find this actually quite a magical game. Actually, I've played through it a few times. This one, d4, d6. So Mamedarov playing d6, c4, e5, and interestingly, we have this knight c3 move. And the most usual move for black here is to play knight f6. By far, well, it's double as popular as e takes. Knight f6. This isn't a problem for black. If say the queens get exchanged off, this isn't a problem. This line, because you know you can play c6 later, and maybe king c7 when you get the chance. Yeah, this isn't such a problem. But what Mamedarov played, this might already cause some issues. Technically, he plays e takes d4. I mean, I guess the follow-up isn't great. Queen takes d4. Now knight c6, and the queen actually drops back to d2, and white has a nice grip on that d5 square. And I know he's blocked in his bishop, but the bishop wants to fianchetto here, and it's interesting because. If you imagine this bishop fianchetting, we've got a nice grip on the d5 square. It just seems to be a very comfortable double fianchetto position coming up from here, where black seems to be a little bit passive because of white marking out the d5 square. Now black played g6 here. Again, it seems a more common move in this position is knight f6. So for example, like this. Games have carried on a bit like this, and black seems to be getting some play. But yeah, he played actually g6, and white's in an exceptionally comfortable position here with that control of d5, it seems, on the surface anyway. So knight f6, g3, so bishop g2, so suppressing d5, having nice control over the d5 square. We have rook e8, knight f3, bishop f5, and here knight h4, so keeping control of d5 evidently, threatening to fracture black's pawns. The bishop drops back to d7. I think there's been a game of Levon Aronian with the bishop coming to e6 here, but it went back in this game to d7. White castles. And yeah, it seems a bit crude. Queen c8. So black just wants to get rid of the bishop, which would loosen white's control of d5. Okay. Rook fe1. So the bishop is free to move on bishop h3 to h1 now without losing the exchange. Yeah. So it just drops back to h1. But still, white has this iron grip, as far as I'm aware, on the d5 square. So it's nice positionally. It looks nice anyway. And we have this move queen g4, which may have this idea of playing something like something quite crude actually. Maybe this g5 and knight g4. Something potentially crude is planned with this move. But we have, in response to this, knight g2. And now, in this position, after knight g2, if something like queen h5, then knight f4. So black actually plays queen d4. By the way, there's a nice little nuance. Sorry, earlier. I just want to make a note of something here. In this position. Just before we get into this, bishop f5, knight h4. Yeah, if there was knight e4 here, bishop takes, and then the move f3 would have caused structural damage, by the way. If bishop f5, we would have caused structural damage. There was this idea that knight e4 was on the cards, but it didn't quite work because of this idea of taking an f3. So that aside, I just wanted to make a note of that. We have this position here with knight g2, queen d4. And we have a simple looking move, rook a d1. Knight e4 now is played in this position, which might be a bit dodgy, knight e4. Maybe just taking the queens off was the safest. So knight e4, queen takes d4, and here there's some problems for black. If knight takes d4, then knight takes e4, and we've got some pressure on d4. Rook takes, and this is quite nice for white here. This position is looking pretty good. There's ideas like this. So Mamedov, he took actually with the bishop, but a very, very interesting move after bishop takes was played. I guess if I ask you, it's going to be kind of obvious. So white's play here. What would you play in this position? So it seems, yeah, black is threatening. Knight has got the pin. It looks kind of tasty. Why has white done this? Can you see what white plays in this? I hope some of you haven't seen this game before. And so white's play here. Bishop takes d4 and move 17. What do you think happens here? I just find it really strange, actually. Okay. Well, white actually did this, what seems to be a very, very powerful exchange sacrifice in retrospect. Rook takes d4. He's like trying to exploit these weaknesses, not just of the d5 square, but these weaknesses over here. And also, remember, there's this knight f4 hitting the bishop. Yeah. So we have rook takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f4 hitting the bishop, and also looking at e4. So in this position, probably black's best move might have been knight takes, and off the bishop takes. He's got two pieces hanging, but this might have been the best continuation, well, from an engine point of view. But it's still pretty nice for white, even though it's the exchange down. This is a very, very nice position to play from. And yeah, Mamedov didn't play that actually. He actually played knight g5, protecting his bishop. But now white just takes on h3, so he's got the bishop here, right? Knight takes, and he just plays king f1, and so he's got these pawns protected. And this is the strangest resignation ever. But black actually just resigned here. I don't know if you guys have seen this. Black resigned here. I would love it if 2700 plus opponent just resigned on move 21, but he did. He just resigned here. White. What are White's threats? Let's try and have some idea. What is this about? Well, White has numerous threats actually. One of them is actually about this knight to play f4 and then bishop g2 because the knight is stranded. If say knight c2, rook d1, knight d5 is on the cards with knight f6. Quite a lot of people have called this a premature resignation, but it is actually advantageous for White. The more you look at it, this position here. What is Black actually doing? This knight's kind of hasn't got too many moves either. It's got b4, but let's say knight b4 and this position, knight d5. We're going to get this exchange back, or are we? It looks pretty nasty. Say like this. We can win another pawn over here. It looks like a disaster. Yeah, so it's just after king f1. I know this is weird, but Mamedorov resigned here. I don't know if I can run through some questions about this position. What do you want to try with Black? And we can investigate it. Tries with Black. Okay, one thing. Okay, before I ask that though, or think about that. c5, we play knight d5. So we've got knight f6 on the cards. Say something like this, then actually we can take here, and if we want, we can win the exchange back with advantage. So c5 might not be that clever before we say c5. So Black to play here. So Black resigned. What would you want to consider? I can give you a line with c6. Let's have a look at c6 just to stop knight d5. That seems sensible. But now knight e4 and we hit the knight and we threaten knight f6. If Black wants to give up the exchange here, this is better for White. This position with the bishop pair against the two knights. But yeah, it's not like a forced mate or whatever. This is just a big advantage positionally for White with the bishop pair in this line. So I think some people were surprised when Mamedorov resigned, but he might be crumbling. He's crumbling here. Look at the bishops, the X-rays, of the bishops. I think Black is crumbling here. So c5 and c6, I think we can sort of rule out quite quickly. But then there's, knight c2 might technically be the best move. In fact, I don't know what you want to suggest here. Knight e6. Let's have a look at knight e6. Someone mentioned knight e6. I think we can take here, try and win our exchange back. If the rook moves, we just go with this. And if here, I think we can strand the knight. It's just taking the square of the knight here. Ouch. And that's a big advantage for White. It's +5. So that was with knight e6. Does anyone else want to suggest anything? So knight e6. What else? Do you want to suggest knight g5? Let's have a look at knight g5 for a moment. Knight d5, hitting d4, threatening knight f6 and knight c7. If c5 here, maybe we can just win our exchange back first. We can cause some damage here. Take here, take here. We got a big advantage in this position. So this is the position. I don't know. F5. I mean, the engine's top 3 at the moment, a depth 25. It's all a big advantage to White. We're talking more than +2. C5, King F8, F5. It's all saying +2 or more. But yeah, it's a strange one, isn't it? This 21 move, and then Mamedorov resigned, the top seed of the tournament. So you want to look at knight e6 again? I mean, we could look at this all night. I mean, knight e6 takes. We take here. What would you play here? if we move the rook, bishop g2, hit the knight here, and then yeah, we're just winning one of the knights. The knights are awkward. Yeah, so okay, so I don't know how many of you are convinced about this resignation, but I don't know what to suggest for black. The engines don't know what to suggest for black. It seems black is heading for a horrible disadvantage here. We can have a look at c6 again. I mentioned it covers the d5 square, but it doesn't cover knight e4. What do we play here with black? Anything else? Rook ad8. If you want to say rook ad8, I don't know what that does. Just knight d5. We can win our exchange back with a big advantage. We double the pawns. f4, strand the knights. We've got bishop g2. Okay, g5. We can force g4. We'll take this pawn. It's a big advantage for white again. Yeah, so he must have had a nice rest day there against the top seed of the tournament. 21 moves, king f1, black resigns. That's why I was trying to go slowly in the opening. I think you might understand now. I was trying to look at the opening. You know, did black really do something terribly wrong in the opening? It seems, you know, white's control of d5 was quite comfortable. So, okay, let's have now... Oh, dear. I'm saving the most bitter games to the last. Do you want to see these bitter games which are like 80 moves? Yeah, I wouldn't normally do this ever, so this is totally against what I normally do. Yeah, so we've not only overrun, we're going to have a look at an 80 move game now. This would be fun, won't it? Yeah. Does anyone want to have a look at these last two? For completeness, I'll do it because I wanted to check out in this session his wins. We're going through his wins. I just wanted to check them out. No matter how painful to look at them, let's check them out. But I will be skipping some moves in this game. So he's black in this next round, in round 8. And he's up against another strong grandmaster, Giulio Ernesto Granda Zuniga, 2646. So playing d4, f5, the Dutch defence again, knight c3. You have this repeat of this line, which seems a bit dodgy for black, where black's having these double pawns, but he gets the bishop pair. So white takes on f6, e3, bishop e6, knight g2. Okay, this thing again, to hit d5 hard. Bishop d6, as though he's going to take on f4, and he does. So black's giving up the bishop pair. It's both sides have got the double pawns. It's quite complicated to evaluate. c6, g3, knight d7, knight b6. Both sides castle. Queen d3, knight c4, b3. Knight goes to d6. Seems about equal here. Not such a big deal at the moment for either side. Knight d1, a4, queen b6, knight e3. Now we have queen a6, offering the exchange of queens. White took, rook takes. It seems black is left with the idea in the future of b5 here, to try and cause some damage to white's structure. Rook fd1, rook d8, rook ac1. Okay, does black want to try b5? Well, there's not much else to do structurally in this position apart from b5. So he plays b5. A takes, knight takes. Looks as though knight c3 might be fun. White covers the c3 square, plays c4. Isn't this backfiring though, because this c6 pawn looks a bit vulnerable? White is slightly better here now, knight c7. And now we have rook a1. This is a nice little a pawn, which white could try and torture with rook a4, maybe, and double the rooks on a5. Black takes on c4, b takes, g6. At least he's freeing up the bishop, you know, protecting that pawn. If the bishop needs to step back here, bishop f1, and the bishop indeed steps back. Rook a3, rook a7, knight c2, and note there's a pin here on that pawn, and there's a vulnerable pawn here. It looks as though knight b4 is now threatened using the pin. And yeah, I don't know what black does about this knight b4. He doesn't want to give the b4 square on the plate. He's got a fractured structure here. Yeah, white's structure is actually better here. He plays actually knight e6, temporarily putting a delay on knight b4. He's on d4 here. But bishop g2, hitting c6. Defense. Rook e3. Knight f8. And now white renews this pin from earlier, rook a1. So again, threatening knight b4 and on c6. Everything seems to be coordinating quite badly against black. So black is on the back foot here. Look at all these free pieces. This doesn't look good. So is this the end of his run in the tournament? It was a nice run, wasn't it? But he seems to be slaughtered positionally here. His pieces are on the back row. He's got this miserable c6 pawn. This looks like a doomed position. This pin, it looks pretty miserable. But anyway, he plays bishop f7, hitting c4 for a moment. But is that really an issue? Because doesn't white like fork both rooks with knight b4? So white plays knight b4. And this move is actually virtually forced now. So guess what black plays here? So black to play what would you play here with black? There aren't too many options really. Yeah, okay, so he doesn't really want to try and defend this. It's dropping off anyway because the bishop's on it as well. So he gives up the exchange here, as trying to reduce as much pain as possible. So rook takes a7. Yes, he's the exchange down. He's got one pawn for it, and he's looking at another. Bishop takes. Rook takes c4. So what's the material situation? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. White is the exchange up for just a pawn. Rook e7. So now we have check. And in this position, now bishop c4. So yeah, there's no mate at the moment. The knight's holding h7. Bishop a4 was played. This might be a slight slip up actually, this bishop a4. Black is threatening actually check here, followed by rook c3 check. This is quite annoying. If white had played, let's say h4 check, and then we just take this bishop. Yeah, the bishop's also attacked. It's another consideration. But apparently in this position, instead of bishop a4, apparently white can maintain an advantage here. This looks a bit crazy. King h3. Check. There's bishop g2. That's why it retains an advantage for white, the exchange up. This is a computer move, this king h3, isn't it? Or is it? You would have spotted that. Yeah. So king h3 wasn't played. We've seen the move bishop a4 instead. And here the advantage has slipped down. Even though black's the exchange down, there's definitely a slip of advantage here with bishop a4. We're down almost to less than, no, almost about half a pawn technically, in fact, after this next move, b3. He's magicked up some compensation here because of white's slip, white not playing king h3. All of a sudden now, there's a threat immediately of b2, actually, as well as bishop d5 being dangerous. So white now plays rook ab7, which puts a hold on b2, clearly, but didn't stop bishop d5. Bishop d5 check. Now again, here, probably the most accurate move is f3. Just giving back the exchange. And white might be a tiny bit better here, but yeah, he's messed things up a little bit, it seems. But white is better here, slightly. But no, white actually played now, after this check, king h3. And instead of just routinely taking the rook, in fact, black cast doubt now on white's king safety here by playing g5. So letting the rook escape, because this is going to win the exchange anyway. This check and a knight takes e7. So black has somehow pulled off already an equalization, the exchange down here, because of white's inaccurate move when he didn't play king h3. So white here now maybe starts making things worse. He has to play super accurately in this position. As an example, I mean, say bishop takes. Check is actually a disaster for white. After check here, takes, protecting the bishop. It's actually winning material. So yeah, white has to play very, very accurately in this position all of a sudden after g5. So f3 apparently might give white still an advantage after takes. There might be an advantage for white here. But yeah, clearly he's blown it to a large extent. It seems, if he has to play this accurately, what on earth is this? So in fact, yeah, he slips up with fg, and now black fully is back in the game. He's undoubling his pawns now after fg. So he's still got g4 and knight g6 on the cards to win back the exchange. We have bishop takes b3, which is a blunder. It's absolutely an amazing blunder now at move 39. It seems the only move which might give white an equal position here. This is really bad if white is being forced to play accurately, is this move. I mean, it's crazy, but that's the move mentioned which might be equal here. Yeah, I mean, let's see, why is that? Rook c2, there's check, and that might be okay. That's actually very good for white. But here after bishop e8, if bishop e8 was played, rook h1, so we're threatening things like g4 check. We have check, and this should be, apparently this is equal, apparently. After b2 check, here there's a kind of perpetual situation. But no, white loses the thread completely of the game. Well, he's got to find these computer moves to just survive. Bishop e8 is a computer move, right? He actually just ends up being material down now after bishop takes b3. Because now this forcing sequence winning a piece. g4 check, knight g6 check, and taking on e7. Winning a piece. He's a piece up. Yeah, it's a bit of a turnaround. So if rook takes, we just take the bishop. So we're going to be a piece up whatever happens. So yeah, a turnaround. So knight takes e7, Black is a piece up after all that. I know, it's like Houdini, it's magic, isn't it? That black has turned the tables from what was a miserable position to be a piece up here. Can anyone believe this sequence of events? This is unbelievable, right? I mean, this is how brutal chess is, yeah? I mean, the resources in positions is incredible. It's much higher than we appreciate a lot of the time, because, you know, king safety and things like that. And here, you know, there's a lot of work to do a conversion to win, actually. But that was crazy that white really had to find king h3 earlier to have any advantage. The game continues for quite a long time now. This is like an 80 move game. So let's see what happens. King takes. And I'm just going to go and fast forward a bit. Excuse me, going in fast forward. So the pawns get fixed down. I think that's like plan one. Fix down the pawns, yeah? And then the king's coming up to the centre slowly. It doesn't mind the exchange of rooks there. That's not going to happen. And then he's getting a blockade here. So he's got a nice blockade. And now, yeah, he's got his king and his rook in a nice place. And the knight. And now the pawns are dropping off here. It seems eventually after rook e3. Now black is threatening the check. Actually, maybe get the pawns after with rook g5. So we have rook a6 check. Actually, no, not with rook g5. Well, that's winning as well, actually. Rook e4. And here white resigned. His pawns are going. So that was on move 81. He won that. I know, it's crazy. It's crazy. Look at the position black had. It's unbelievable. It's frightening, isn't it? It's frightening. He had this position with all his pieces on the back row, basically. If we look at this position, we can just count a few issues. I mean, we've got pieces on the back row, we've got this weak c6 pawn, and we've got this tactically with also this pin. But it seems, you know, losing the exchange sometimes is a nice painkiller in chess. Clearly, to lose the exchange like this is not the end of the world if he's not getting checkmated with the two rooks on the 7th. Because, yeah, white did have some underlying light square weaknesses anyway. This bishop and this rook coordinating against the king here. But it was here, the move had to be played, it seems, king h3. That would have settled things down a bit. This move, king h3. So bishop f1, bishop g2. If g5, check, taking, safe enough. So he didn't play king h3, and it seems to just go downhill now. After bishop a4, b3. This is so dangerous. Yeah, I mean, why did he play that? You might wonder, why would he want to go into this? I mean, how does white play this position? Because black is actually threatening b2 now. That's the thing. How does white actually play this? I mean, it seems technically rook a b7 here is the best move from an engine point of view. If he had played rook this one, that's a mate in 2. Check. And checkmate. Yeah, the rook needs to cover e3 after the check, and then rook c3. The rook needs to cover e3, and just have a look at that again. On yeah, I mean, this is a force mate into next move, whatever happens. Yeah. So if that's actually technically the best move, it's just amazing that black wasn't so keen to immediately get back the exchange. If he had played this, then again, white's slightly better here. It's no problem for white. But what he did do is ask for more. yeah, in this position. He didn't get back his exchange. All of a sudden, you know, this g5 and knight g6, he ends up winning material. So he ends up winning material. Yeah, g5. White has to play f3. That's the only move to stay in the game, it seems, technically. On bishop takes f3. Bishop takes b3 check. This is mating black. So yeah, f3 would have stayed in the game. But yeah, he played this, which... now the only move here is bishop e8. And this is apparently a draw. This is good enough for a draw here. So like this. Check. Because just in time for this, we can't take here because we lose this rook, right? But it's just in time. It seems white can force a draw. This is not exactly ideal with this position, threatening the mate. And the knight can't move because it'll be mate like that. So this would be actually forcing a draw. So king h8, just rook here, forces a draw. But yeah, it's just incredible, the resources in the game. Yeah, that was an amazing game, escape. And he needed that luck. Okay, so, and yes, there was another mammoth game in round 9, which we're going to have a look at. So in round 9, he was against another strong grandmaster, higher rated than him. Edgerant's Malcolmian 2676. So he was playing with the white pieces. He played d4. So Edgerant's Malcolm played knight f6. And yes, we didn't see a Slav, so you know that's great, isn't it? We saw Grunfeld defense, which is another popular opening at the high levels at the moment. Grunfeld defense. Sorry, did someone want to repeat the game from the start? Sorry, hold on a sec. Before we go on to this, did you repeat of game from start or not? Of the previous game from the start? I could flick through it if you want. So the round 8 game, do you want to repeat? No. No. Okay, yeah, let's get on. Let's get on. Good. Okay, so d5, c takes. It'll be on YouTube anyway, just check on YouTube later. So knight takes d5, I hope it'll be on YouTube. e4, knight takes c3. So we have this Grunfeld, and I thought this line isn't that trendy. I thought bishop c4, knight e2, but he actually played knight f3. Actually, historically, this is a very popular move, allowing, you know, potentially bishop g4 is useful. c5, rook b1, black castled, bishop e2. And I think, yeah, so this is all pretty well-trodden territory. Black played knight c6. Usually c takes is played. He played knight c6. It's another popular move. d5. So offering the c3. This is very theoretical. This is meant to be slightly better for white. Bishop takes c3 is meant to be slightly better. Black played knight e5. If black takes on c3, this sort of stuff is meant to be quite good fun for white. Yes, h-pawn, dangerous. Yes, this has been played quite a lot apparently. This position, with white having a dangerous attack, as an example. So, okay, so knight e5, and knight takes usually knight takes e5 is played here. This is the most popular move. Nearly 700 games, knight takes e5. But I think he tried to surprise his opponent here. He played queen c2. Queen c2. Okay. Yeah, usually if on this one, games might continue like this. This is a well-trodden path for those interested. It's a well-trodden path. Anyway, I think the surprise move in this preparation here, in this game, would seem to be queen c2 now. Queen c2. We have knight takes f3, bishop takes. Queen a5, bishop d2. c4. It looks as though black should be doing okay here. White castles, but after b5, yeah, black seems to have a pawn majority over here, which maybe he gets a little bit excited to use, but white seems to have, you know, potentially dangerous e5 now on the cards with d6 just to liberate things. Black puts a stop to that with bishop e5, and white wants to lift this blockade here, so he plays g3. He wants to move the bishop and play f4 maybe at some point. So g3, bishop h3, and you might find this a little bit surprising, but bishop g2 offering to get rid of his bishop pair, which technically leaves black with, you know, still a very, you know, promising position. You might wonder why would you do this, bishop g2. Let's have a quick look. Bishop here, I think black's doing fine basically in this position. It might be quite annoying, this configuration here, because if you ever play f4, I think it's just quite annoying to have this configuration. So anyway, so bishop g2, black took on g2, so we're still looking forward to, it seems, f4 at some point. Rook fd8, rook ed1, rook ab8, and black might be keen on trying to get this, you know, past pawn at some point with b4. This b4 break looks quite kind of interesting. Now, there was an interview of Erwin about this particular position, which I found kind of interesting, because it would seem that, well, the question was, why not in this position play bishop e1 with the idea of f4, and then maybe like bishop f2 and stuff. Now, this bishop e1 was rejected. This is really quite interesting. It was rejected because I think it was mentioned something like just doubling, for example. Well, there's bishop takes c3 always as well. So he's tied down to that. I think black can just potentially double or even just play for b4. But it seems as though there wasn't much to play for in this position. c3 is a bit of a pain. So he rejected that. He actually played a much more radical move. He played bishop f4, accepting double pawns. He thought maybe this was trickier for black. There's actually forcing an issue here. He's volunteering double pawns. Maybe he's trying to get his central pawns going. So bishop takes f4, g takes. So he'd rather have this position with the dark square bishops off. We have queen c7 hitting f4, queen c1 protecting f4, a5 trying to use the pawn majority. So b4 looks like thematic. a3 trying to stop that. Now I think black is slightly better here, and maybe is pretty ambitious to try and win this game. It seems black doesn't have too many problems. In fact, the move e6 might be quite sensible. So say takes this position might be kind of a sensible thing to do with queen takes to hold b5. This seems okay for black. Black's slightly better, it seems. But for some reason, black here maybe got overexcited about his prospects. He actually played b4, and all of a sudden here, this isn't so easy for black, this b4. After a takes, now white wants to avoid c takes, because then c3 is kind of dangerous. This is to be avoided, this position, because then we've got things like queen takes f4, etc. if the queen moves. So he plays rook takes b4, but black has basically sacrificed the pawn here and might not be getting it back. So he's created what seems to be a very dangerous passed pawn here, but if we count the pawns, he is a pawn down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I know these are double pawns, so maybe they don't count as much. But he's a pawn down. Queen e3, so he's ready to try and get rid of this guy. Rook b8. Rook c1. Maybe, you know, black was thinking, well, it's just double pawns, it doesn't matter. But he's still going to be a pawn down now. After c2, we have queen d2, being annoying here, hitting this, protecting this. It's going to be keep his pawn up. Queen c4, so hitting e4. White plays queen takes c2. Queen takes b4. Now again, it's just double pawns though, isn't it? It's not really an extra pawn, right? Is it? Is this enough for a win? Is this, if I ask that question, is this enough for white to win? What would you say? Definitely, definitely. This is at move 31. Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So what happened here? Well, queen d3 happened. Queen a4. As though rook b3 might be useful, maybe to annoy the queen. Rook c4 with tempo. Okay. Now it looks as though queen g4 is naughty. So h3 stopping that. Queen d6, so white has to react to this. e5, he's making his progress, it seems, with his pawns. Now he wants to play d6, but he prepares that, it seems, with rook d4. So d6 looks like fun. Queen b7, pinning the pawn. White now plays f5, so he's dissolving potentially his double pawns. That's a good landmark, checkpoint. Dissolving the double pawns here. That's a good sign that white's got a real pawn. So rook d8. So white's definitely got a... Whoops. Rook d8. White's definitely got a real pawn now. He dissolves... no, he doesn't quite play f takes g in this position. Or did he? Sorry. My score sheet's gone. Sorry, hold on a sec. Yeah, he didn't play f takes g in this position. He actually played king h2. If he plays this... Yeah, this is okay as well, but he actually played king h2, and I don't think black's in the position to play g takes. That would seem to damage king safety too much. Let's have a quick look. If g takes, I think this is crushing actually. This position here, rook h4, end of game. So black dare not do that. So we have this position, king h2, queen b2. Queen e3, and here with queen e3 actually d6 might be more effective now, with the queen glancing at the back row potentially in some lines. Queen c2, fg, so he's got a real pawn, he's a real pawn up, got rid of his double pawns. d6, e takes, and this pawn, is it dangerous? Well, yes, d7 looks quite dangerous, and the queen's ready for queen e8. Queen f5, stopping d7. f4, and it looks as though queen e5 is now on the cards, as well as d7 being dangerous, because we've got the back row check, and in any case. So rook d7 puts a stop to that. Okay, can he grind a win here? Now, what's at stake with this game in round 9? Is that if he wins this, he's actually won the whole tournament around to spare. So that would be amazing if he could win from this position. Is everyone aware of that? He actually won Reykjavik with a round spare. Sorry, I've killed the suspense there. White did manage to win this, but okay, the question is how. So he plays king g3. So keeping some pressure on black, keeping the game going. King h7, rook d2, queen b1, Queen d4. So nice centralization, but what is he doing with this? Queen e6, Queen e5. Now here, actually, after this might be a slight slip up, or it's actually a very difficult position here after this Queen c4, because now White plays f5. He's like simultaneously he's exposing Black's king a little bit more with f5 here. He's getting rid of the defenses a little bit. Here we have check, King h2, Queen f3, and now there's only one defensive pawn for the Black king. Okay, is that progress? Queen d4 now. With this, it supports Rook f2, which might be quite dangerous for Black. Queen f5, Rook e2, and now with the Queen here, actually, Rook e8 is on the cards for trying to mate the Black king, potentially, as an idea. Rook e8, g5. Now in this position, g5 I think supports Queen f4. If Rook e8, or no, hang on, no, there's another idea, not Queen f4, King g6, and Black might be okay. So Rook e8 might not be effective here. Not Queen f4. I think that's an advantage for White. In fact, that's just winning for White with Rook e7 there. The pawn is queening. Yeah. So no, the idea of g5 is actually quite clever, to give the king g6. But instead of Rook e5, he plays Rook e5 now. So Queen f4 loses. We've established that because of Rook e7. So Black plays Queen g6. He's hitting this pawn again. Rook d5. Queen e6. Okay, Queen d2. Queen f6. And now White plays King g2. He's taking his time here. I think it's a 30-second increment now. So White's taking his time. Black's not doing much. So this is a position to start testing the opponent without being in too much of a hurry, especially if you're playing increment chess. So King g7, Queen d2, King g6. He's got to prove something though, surely, at some point. King g2, King h7, Queen e2 now is played. So yeah, if Rook takes d6, then there's this check, which wins the Rook. So Black can't take that, by the way. So Queen e2, King g7. Now here, this last remaining defensive pawn is challenged with h4. Immediately we see that if g takes, then this Queen g4 is really dangerous, hitting the Rook. And if Queen g6, then there's Rook g5, right? So this h4 seems quite dangerous. So h4 is throwing everything at Black. But now we have Rook takes d6. Rook takes g5. Or that might have been a good move, Rook takes g5. He actually plays h takes g. So he's one pawn up still. Queen e6. And technically, it's equal here. The engines actually indicate this should have been a draw, maybe, with best play. Yeah, it seems quite a vulnerable pawn on g5. Check. Check. And apparently, King g6 should be okay for Black. Or King f8. Or even King e8. But what was played here was actually Queen e7, and it's here, guys, that there's a massive evaluation change. Here it's all 0.00 actually on King e8 or King f8 or King g6. I mean, what does White do actually here? You imagine this position, it should be a draw, right? Queen b2, Queen f4, it should be a draw. But yeah, it seems, how can Black possibly lose this? Okay, so he plays Queen e7. But this allows now, this is now, apparently this is very good now for white. Check. And all of a sudden, you know, if king here, then we've got rook e5 winning the queen, yeah? So we got this check. So the king goes to e8 and is getting away from the pawn. You see the king going that direction. We have check. And now, this is actually quite dangerous for black. For example, well, he played queen d8. If he plays king d7, then check and rook e5 is quite dangerous for black, like this, and black is in a bit of trouble apparently. Although again it's like difficult to prove. You might think, well, I think the king's in trouble here, but yeah, after this, king e8, check, queen d8, we have this position where the king seems to be a bit in trouble. Queen d7, check, throws in some more checks, check. He's driving the king now away. You might think, why not rook e6? Well, the checks will continue maybe with queen h5 here. That's dangerous. So anyway, here the king goes to d8, check, 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 and the king's now over there and the pawn's like ready to queen over here. Queen d6, king g3, king d7, and now this rook and pawn ending, funny enough, is winning for white. What he does is take off the queens, and the king's actually a little bit far away from the pawn. It's also cut off, right, in the force field. He moves his king up. He's going to herd this pawn, king e7, keeping that shield for the king not to come across. And now the king comes in, king h5. And now, not, well, I think a lot of things win here, but he just played king h6 at move 80. And black resigned. And with this win, epic win, he won the Reykjavik Open, a round to spare. And I'm not going to go through his loss in the last round. I think he didn't care. Just slight rating implications, but he won the tournament with this, a round to spare. And it's probably, you know, his best tournament of his entire life up to this point. But yeah, so he had a bit of luck in these games, a little bit, but great determination and taking his time and resourcefulness at the same time. So I think we've briefly gone through his wins. That's what I wanted to do in this session. I hope you enjoyed that and got something out of it. Okay, so thanks. Do you want me to whiz through this game again? I can just whiz through it. Just Grunfeld. So he didn't seem to get much out of the opening. He accepted double pawns here, a bit of controversial, like double pawns. Black temporarily sacrificed the pawn. It somehow became a real extra pawn later with this f5. And then there was this long sort of tango of queens and stuff where white played eventually for h4, and then I know black seemed to completely mess things up around about here, not playing king g6, for example, king e8. Somehow the king managed to get away from the pawn and transpose into a winning rook and pawn ending. Okay. Oh dear. So yeah, okay, hope you enjoyed that. See you next week. Thanks very much. Comments or questions on YouTube.